Happy March 23rd. JLD here, and welcome to MSTR Today. This video is part 2 of a 2-part series that I'm doing over the weekend because I'm traveling, and part 1 obviously was yesterday. So if you haven't seen yesterday's video, Saturday's video, March 22nd's video, I recommend going back watching it first because this is just a continuation, the second half of a presentation from Joe Bryan to Strategy, to the company Strategy, about why MSTR is the world's most important company. I think it's fantastic. I love it. I have links to both what's the problem, and this full presentation below in the show notes. So if you want to watch both at your leisure and binge them, I highly recommend it. They're fantastic. This video is not financial advice. Please do comment below. Let me know what you think about this video, where you're watching from. If you like these kind of videos, I'll start bringing them a little more often, especially when I'm traveling and I have to. But let's just dive on in. So Joe, take it away.
What happens in fiat economies where someone has access to a big red button is inevitably they press it and they press it and they press it and they press it some more. And we've all seen pictures like this from our history books. And this was Germany in the early 20s, 100 years ago. But the same has happened all around the world, because inevitably fiat currencies just print fiat telos. There is no other end game here. And this is exactly what happened in Germany. And this chart on the left is obviously a 6-year period from 1918 through start of 1918 through the end of 1923, where it shows the number of paper marks after the end of the First World War that were required to buy one gold mark. And it went from around 1 to 1 trillion in 6 years. And so what happened? Well, they had access to a big red button. And so they printed fiat telos. And obviously they printed marks, but I'm going to talk about fiat telos because all fiat currencies are just fiat telos. And the people realized increasingly that they couldn't save their economic energy. They go out and do a day's work and they get paid in fiat telos. And they see the next day those fiat telos are worth less. They then want to get rid of the fiat telos as quickly as possible into something which is a better store of their economic energy. Now, Hugo Steins recognized this very early on. And so not only did he get rid of his fiat telos, he took the opposite side of that. He went out and borrowed as many fiat telos as he possibly could to buy hard assets. And for him, hard assets was companies, it was infrastructure, it was commodities. He ended up owning around 4,500 big companies in Germany over this 2 or 3 year period. And so what happened? He borrowed these fiat telos, and then the fiat telos declined further in value, effectively eroding his debts in real terms. And because the fiat telos were declining, there was yet more and more budgetary and currency crises, and the government had no choice but to just hit the big red button again. And this went round and round and round. And he just repeated the same cycle over and over again. And it was almost perfect, almost. And so what really was he doing? Well, the government have the big red button, and the question is, are they going to press it? And if they press it or they don't press it, which side are you on? Are you on the losing side? Are you on the winning side? And when you watch the video, you'll understand that most of society here is on the losing side. Even the wealthy are on the losing side here. The politically connected are the only segment of society that benefit from the money printing. But all of society is more on the side of they will never press it, because they're either unaware that the government is pressing the button, or they don't have access to certain things which would enable them to bet on the fact that they will press it forever. And what Hugo was able to do was leverage his position and his access to financial markets to take the other side of the bet. So he leveraged up as much as he could in the thing that was going to zero to buy the thing that was of limited quantity. And so buying these companies, buying commodities, enabled him to use them as effective economic storage, economic energy storage, while everything else got inflated away. Now, that was an amazing bet, but it could have been better. He was missing something. He was missing Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the ultimate here, but it didn't exist. But now here we are, 100 years later.
We don't have audio on the that video, so explain what they're saying.
You can't hear it. Oh, that's a shame. I'm just gonna skip on. That is effectively Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve. Apologies, I thought you'd be able to hear the video. Explaining to 60 Minutes that the US government, the central bank, can print as much money as it wants, but it doesn't tend to print it physically, although it can, and it distributes it via the Federal Reserve. They just print it digitally, and they can print as much of it as they like. And he's only saying what we all already know. But the complexity with which the money printing occurs via quantitative easing or all of the technical jargon goes to hide the fact that the monetary base is just expanding in exactly the same way as it expanded for Germany in the early 1920s and every other country around the world. And so it's just nice to hear it in his own words, in his own voice. But this chart here is, again, taken from the video, but this shows the red chart on the left-hand axis is the monetary base in the US, which is now north of 22 trillion. And the blue chart is the US national debt, which is now above 36 trillion. So this chart is slightly out of date on the right-hand side. Now, I've labeled 1971 because this is when the US unilaterally came off the gold standard. Prior to 1971, you could exchange your dollars for a certain amount of gold. But Nixon took the US off, and then every other country in the world followed. And effectively, it allowed the US to print as many dollars as it likes because it was positioned at the center of the entire financial system. But this 36 trillion doesn't include the 50 to 200 trillion of unfunded liabilities the government has. So this is promises to make payments that it hasn't had to make yet for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. Now there's a range there because they're paid over a long period of time, so you can choose to discount them into today's money at different rates. But if you think about it, the US government is losing $2 trillion a year, is $36 trillion in debt, and owes another 50 to 200 trillion on top of that. The only way out is just to print more dollars, because you can't go bust because you can print your own currency. And so the money printer is just systematically destroying the US dollar's purchasing power in exactly the same way as the fiatellos were destroyed 100 years ago in Germany. The outcome is inevitable. But the dollar is the best that we have. Every person in the world would swap their currency in a heartbeat for what you guys get to use. And this is the change of every other currency versus the dollar over a 10-year period. And some currencies have ceased to exist completely. So this isn't a US-centric problem. This is an everywhere problem. But the US dollar is just going to zero more slowly than everything else. And so how does this affect you guys? Well, strategy is just doing the Hugo Stein's trade. Strategy is the next inflation king. The US government is pressing the big red button, or the central bank. People realize they can't save their economic energy in fiatellos. And we all know this. Right? Everybody knows this intuitively, that you can't put money in the bank and expect the purchasing power to be the same in a year's time, or 5 years' time, or 10 years' time. You can't. It's being stolen. It's being stolen through inflation. And the inflation is higher than the central bank tell us, because we all know it. We'll see it with our own eyes when we go to the shops. We go to the grocery store. We know the inflation is not 2% or 5%. It's like 10% more. We know this. But then Strategy borrows fiatellos to not just buy hard assets, but to buy Bitcoin. And the fiatellos decline further in value, triggering more budgetary and currency crises, and you have to press the big red button again, and the cycle just goes round and round and round. And this is what Strategy is doing. But it's also not like Strategy is not the next inflation king. It's the last inflation king. There is nothing that comes after this, because Bitcoin is the final destination here. Bitcoin is the only absolutely scarce asset in the entire universe. There is nothing harder than Bitcoin. There is nothing to move to from Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is the separation of money and state. So it can't be inflated away. So you guys are the last. But you also have a second advantage. A second advantage that Hugo Steins didn't have. You're actually not the last inflation king. You're the last inflation and monetization king. Of where Bitcoin sits in the list of assets in the world. And it's 7th, so it's just above silver. If you look at what's above it, you've got gold, and then you've got 5 companies. To think that the total value of Bitcoin is less than any company in the world, let alone 5 of them, is ludicrous. Bitcoin is decentralized, immutable, neutral money for the world. It's a civilizational change technology. We're going to go through this once, like the internet. And Bitcoin's going to make the internet, the change to our lives from the internet, pale in insignificance. Because the internet only affects our online lives and our offline lives by a lack of attention, I guess. But money affects everything. It affects our day-to-day decision making. It affects our goals. It affects our life choices. It affects everything. And to think that Bitcoin is worth less than any company, let alone 5 of them, is ludicrous. And even if your mental model for Bitcoin was, well, it's just digital gold. Even if it was as limited as that, which is not a bad place to start, absolutely. Well, Bitcoin is so much more than that. But even if it was just that, it's 1/10 of gold. It beats gold hands down on every single measure that you could care to evaluate it. And so we are just so early. And really what Bitcoin is competing against is not assets, it's asset classes. And the numbers on this table for Bitcoin and gold slightly don't match the previous table because this is taken from a slightly different time. Thank you to Jesse Myers. But the visual representation here shows how early we are. Bitcoin is 2 trillion and the total global asset base is 900 trillion plus. Bitcoin is going to eat gold. It's going to eat art. It's going to eat cars and collectibles. It's going to eat all of these things. It's going to eat real estate. It's going to eat them because all of these things have been monetized. We know we can't keep our dollars in the bank because they're declining to 0. So what do? We buy a second house. We buy the stock market. We buy some collectibles because they're a better store of value. But we wouldn't have done that if we could have bought Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin smashes everything else. So Bitcoin's going to eat all of these things. It's going to demonetize them all. And so the end game here is that they just continue to press the big red button. And the more they do, the more Bitcoin eats the world. And the more Bitcoin eats the world, the more they need to press the big red button. And it's just inevitable. The outcome is inevitable. We're just so early. And it's inevitable through game theory because every individual, every company, every country in the world is going to end up owning Bitcoin. It is money for you, it's money for your friends, it's money for your competitors, but it's money for your enemies as well. And if you know everyone's going to buy it, and you know if you don't buy it, you're at a disadvantage, then you have to buy it. And if you have to buy it, you buy it as early as possible, and you buy as much of it as possible. And this is exactly what you guys are doing. And you have one amazing final advantage, is that you're in America. And you are at the home of the free market. You may not feel like that all the time, but compared to everywhere else, you're in the freest market in the world. And you have access to an inordinate amount of capital and a huge amount of innovative capital. And so that, combined with the fact that you've got this inflation trade and the monetization trade, and you're in the best country in the world to execute this, it just means Strategy is the most important company in the world today. And beyond that, it's going to become the most valuable company in the world today. And I hope, and the reason for that is Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin. And, I realize, the vast majority of people who work for MicroStrategy probably wouldn't class themselves as Bitcoiners today. But I would hope, perhaps when you've seen the video or after this presentation, you might be more motivated to take some time and make those first steps, and don't make the mistakes that I made by rejecting Bitcoin several times before finally putting that little bit of work in, because it changes everything. It changes you, it changes your decision making, it gives you a glimpse into the future. And if you are interested to learn more, then if you'd like to go to satsversusfiat.com, which is where What's the Problem lives, I've got 5 additional videos there covering different aspects of Bitcoin, all starter videos, so it's accessible to everybody. But if you're interested maybe in the financial system, or how Bitcoin works, or how Bitcoin is bringing empowerment through commerce and freedom and energy all around the world, there's a great talk there by Alex Gladstein, and I understand he may be coming to talk to you as well in one of these sessions, so that would be amazing. There's also a video there which explains how, which may not always be obvious to you guys, and certainly for me as well in the UK, but the degree to which the financial system is tilted in our favor at the expense of most other countries in the world. And then there is obviously, there has to be one of Michael Saylor on there, which is There Is No Second Best, which is, I challenge anyone with even a small inclination towards the business world not to watch that and not be fired up completely that Bitcoin is going to take over the world. So I hope there's something there for everybody. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
And there you have it, another episode of MSTR Today. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. To me, it's such a comfort to listen to this video. I go to it whenever I'm just feeling a little down or just a little frustrated with how things might be working out, even though I know that volatility is vitality. I'm human. I'm going to have emotions. You're going to have emotions. They're going to be a roller coaster because Bitcoin is unbelievably volatile. MSTR is even more volatility than that because it's volatility stacked on volatility. That's what we signed up for. Let's just understand it, but realize it's still going to feel tough sometimes. So have videos like I just shared today in your back pocket. That's why I'm trying to bring you a video every single day about MSTR, about Michael Saylor, about Bitcoin, about strategy, because I want you to have great content like this that can just help you get through any FUD, any doubts that you might be having. Because you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And as Michael Saylor said, there is no second best.
What's the second best? There is no second best.